1 second. I've got to get rid of this one thing before I can start my video. Okay, there we go. Okay. Hello, everyone. Happy Halloween.
I don't know how to turn on my.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. And we're, I think, at our 7th class in this series on the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. So let's go ahead and begin, as usual, with doing a few prayers. So we'll recite this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha just once together. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. We'll do the short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then refuge in bodhicitta as usual, the first time in English, then 2 more times in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gipe sanam gi dola penshir sangye drupar shog Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chunyen Gipe Sonam Gi Dola Penshir Sangye Drupar Shog. Okay, let's go ahead and start with a short meditation. And we'll spend the first few minutes just focusing on the breath. Give ourselves a chance to let go of whatever distractions we might have from the day. And then I'll come in and lead you in setting motivation together. So just begin the meditation now. So now let's set our motivation together. And throughout the course so far, we've really been trying to identify the ways in which we get into our own difficulties through following the mind of self-cherishing in particular. And if we've been working with these teachings, we can already see, if of course we haven't seen it already in our other practice of the Buddha's teachings, that we can change our minds, that it's completely possible to replace habitual patterns such as the pattern of being self-centered, focused on our own welfare, with the attitude of cherishing others, of holding them most dear. Although this is a very long and difficult process of changing our minds, it's completely possible. Nothing is fixed in our minds. Our minds are subject to causes and conditions. If we want to create more wholesome experiences, then all we need do is change the thoughts and, of course, the behaviors that follow from those. And if we want to continue to experience all the sufferings of samsara, then we just keep doing the same thing. So when we turn our minds towards this goal of complete enlightenment for the welfare of all beings, this mind of bodhicitta, we do it within the understanding that it is completely possible to alter our minds, and not just in very slight ways, to where we overcome, this or that negative habit or pattern, but to alter our minds completely, to replace these twin demons with conventional bodhicitta, the mind that strives to be of the greatest benefit to all beings in order to overcome our self-cherishing, and also the mind of ultimate bodhicitta that sees the emptiness of all phenomena, particularly of the self, the person, the I, and in that way gets rid of our self-grasping. This change is possible. We can do it. All we need do is continue to apply our minds to these teachings. And we always do it with bodhicitta motivation, with the desire to achieve our greatest potential, so we can help others to do this work, inspire them, give them the teachings that they need. And to do that most perfectly, we have to become a Buddha. So again, form that mind of bodhicitta in your heart right now, the strong intent to benefit all sentient beings, and the aspiration to become a Buddha in order to accomplish that. And it's for this reason that we're here tonight, to work on improving and changing our own minds so we can help others to do the same. And when you're ready, you can open the eyes fully and we'll begin. Okay, so in the last class, we were finishing off this one section. I haven't been going back to that chart so much, but let me go ahead and pull that up just so we have some grounding in where we're at in this text. This is that chart again. We did do some changing of the numbers on the first, second, and third parts there. So this was verses 1 through 8. We looked at that idea of, again, the bodhisattvas transforming afflictions and self-grasping into the path. This is where we introduced that concept of the peacocks in the poison grove and them partaking of the poison in order to make their feathers even more lustrous. And this is the principle of transforming problems into happiness, Lojong. And then we went on to kind of making that declaration in the 9th verse by practicing Tonglen, which is the main practice that we've been accompanying all these various verses with, is the idea that we want to, at the time when we're experiencing suffering, think about removing other suffering and giving them our happiness so that they can find peace and well-being. Then we went on to verses 10 through 48. And these were the karmic cause and effect and their antidotes, and we're almost done with that. We had the last 3 verses that do have a particular kind of shift in the pattern, but most of those verses up through verse 45 we're structured around the whole idea of, again, that this is a particular result that we're experiencing. We have to own it and recognize that we are the creators of that. No one else created it. No one else is kind of throwing it at you. But this is your own wheel of sharp weapons that you've created that is coming back at you. And then, of course, what do we learn from that? What is it that we need to avoid on the basis of what was the cause of creating that suffering? So let's go back to just very briefly look at verse 45. This is the one that, again, is the first of these last three verses. I'm sorry, 46, the first of the last three verses that kind of summarize this entire section. So verse 46 said, in short, the undesirable that is encountered is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us, like a smith slain by his or her own sword. Again, a swordsmith who has created a sword that then maybe that person gets recruited into battle, and then on the battlefield they're killed by their own sword, the sword that they've created. So it says, now we should be conscientious in regard to negative actions. Again, I won't go through the whole commentary because we talked about this last week. I'm just reminding you of this verse because we are going to talk a little bit more about this concept of it being like a sword in a moment. Let's go to 47, which is a similar verse. There really isn't huge differences between these, just a different analogy. And then also, of course, just talking about dukkha experienced in bad migrations, rather than in the previous one, it was the undesirable that is encountered. But these are both negative experiences, suffering. So the dukkha experienced in the bad migrations, Dharmarakshita says, is the sharp weapons of bad actions turning against us. In this case, the analogy is like an arrow maker, or a fletcher is the name of that's often used to refer to someone who makes arrows and puts the feathers onto the arrow in the proper place so that you get a good glide with the arrow when it's shot. And the idea here too is the arrow maker has made a poisonous arrow or an arrow of some sort and is killed by his own arrow. And so, again, that's based on some story about Fletcher, who did create these poisonous arrows for an army, and then he was out on the battlefield and was also killed by his own arrow. So we are the creators of what we experience. Again, it's not someone else that's behind all of this. There's no creator God. There's no complete fault on the part of other people. Other people are doing what they're doing, shooting the arrows or this, hacking us with the swords or whatever the case might be. But that's not something that is created from its own side. It is dependent upon our own karma. So then the last line is the same. Now we should be conscientious with regard to negative actions. Very short commentary on this. Again, think the various dukkha. Most of you know this word dukkha. Dukkha is the word that the Buddha used when he spoke of the first noble truth, often translated as suffering, but again, it's bigger than that. It means any form of dissatisfaction, a lack of satisfaction that we experience all the time, essentially. Dukkha has many shades of meaning. But anyway, the various types of suffering that we experienced, even in previous rebirths in the abodes of the bad migrations, such as the three lower realms of the hell beings, the hungry ghosts, the animals, as well as the suffering that I have yet to experience due to the force of my own bad actions in the past or even this life. All of that are the sharp weapons of the bad actions turning against me, of having accumulated many negative actions, just like an arrow maker, killed by his own arrow. Then meditate on taking and giving again, because just as we are experiencing problems, others are experiencing dukkha and problems, and we can take on that on ourself and place it on our self-cherishing mind, and then give them our merit, our body, our wealth, or whatever, so that they can be happy. From now on, by possessing conscientiousness, we looked at conscientiousness last week, this kind of very general way that we guard the mind to keep moving in a virtuous direction. We should abandon the negative, non-virtuous actions that bring rebirth in the bad migrations. So again, all the negative karma, whether it's bad migrations or whether it's something that we experience in a human life that is a kind of what we call our completing karma. Projecting karma is the karma that takes you into a life. Completing karma are the various things that happen within that life. Again, whatever it is that we are experiencing, it's due to our own bad actions, our own wheel of sharp weapons. So again, in the slides, I didn't go right to the slides. So, but this is, again, these are just these last three verses. We have one more yet to do. They're more summary in nature, giving general advice on our practice. I already went through that one, just went through that one, 47. Here's just a little bit from Geshe Ngawan Dargye's commentary, the brief commentary that he put together. It says, hereafter, we should scrupulously avoid all the causes of suffering in the lower realms. That's the kind of the main focus of this one in particular, even though it's not stated that clearly in the verse itself. It seems like the commentaries are all really about avoiding the suffering of the lower realms, which of course is worth avoiding, not just because we ourselves will definitely suffer there, but also because actually it is covered. I'm sorry, it's in the first line of that. It says the bad migrations. I'm sorry, missed that when I went through it, that verse just a short while ago. It's right up here. The dukkha experienced in the bad migrations. So again, these bad migrations, these are not favorable places to be in terms of the suffering that we experience, but moreover, we end up being thwarted in any attempt to benefit others. We can't advance on the path in those suffering states generally because we're just too blinded by other forms of suffering. So again, we should really be afraid of evil, Geshe Ngawan Dargye says, for it is the cause of all misery. Again, this is the main gist of this one, is to just heed what's being said here and to try to do what we can to avoid anything that would propel us into the lower realms. When the fifth Dalai Lama was asked of what he was most afraid, he replied, wrong actions. So, it's Halloween and it's all about kind of getting scared and being scary and whatever. I mean, everything in this world, not a single thing in this world is scarier than wrong actions. Wrong actions should be the scariest because they can drive us into a hellish existence. Whereas anything that anybody does to us, any sort of harm we experience from another person, in and of itself, it only harms us in this life, but it doesn't, propel us into a hell realm or an animal realm or hungry ghost realm. And then I thought this was interesting to point this out. In his commentary, Tenpa Rabke notes that most of the analogies to weapons in this text concern implements such as bows and arrows, swords, and so on. This is also, again, Geshe Ngawan Dargye talking here. The sword actually symbolizes ultimate bodhicitta. For just as the sword kills by cutting, so does ultimate bodhicitta sever the root of psychic existence. So this is one thing we could say in verse 46, where we had the sword, the swordsmith being killed by their own sword. That is, again, meant to be a sort of analogy of how we want to be able to transform what we're experiencing into the sword of wisdom. The sword Manjushri holds, so that we can cut the ignorance that's at the root of all of our suffering. Moreover, just as the spear or arrow pierces, again, we had the arrow in verse 47, so does the relative bodhicitta and destroys the self-cherishing attitude. So this idea of kind of being pierced by the arrow of conventional bodhicitta, relative bodhicitta, because relative bodhicitta is what kind of is the direct antidote or enemy to our self-cherishing. When we cultivate the mind that cherishes others, that wants them to be free from suffering and dedicates ourselves to doing that for them, then we are in direct opposition to any self-centeredness. So it's, again, just another little twist on those two verses in particular. Gives us some idea of some of the shades of meaning that can be seen here. So again, the idea throughout this has been when something's coming at us and is causing us pain and suffering, it's that wheel of sharp weapons, but we can use it as the second way, the wheel of sharp weapons destroying the self-grasping and the self-cherishing. Okay. So instead of continuing to be like an ironsmith slain by the sword he made, or a Fletcher killed by his own arrows, we realize that we can do something about our situation, right? We cultivate a mind that cherishes others and wants to aid them, creating an arrow of bodhicitta that will pierce our self-centeredness. We develop wisdom that understands dependent arising and emptiness and use it as the sword to cut the ignorance that is the root of our cyclic existence. Whoops. So the idea again is that we can transmute that. This is all what Lojong is all about. The suffering we experience, instead of it being like we're killing ourselves with our own sword, we can make that into the causes that help us to create the wisdom, realizing emptiness that cuts ignorance, and the arrow, use it as the means. With that analogy, rather than being pierced by the arrow ourselves, we let it pierce our self-cherishing and replace it with the self or the other cherishing attitude of bodhicitta, conventional bodhicitta. This is kind of a bit of an unusual verse. I don't know. I think it's kind of unusual. To once again encounter the sufferings of the laity, or the householders, as we're often called, as lay folks who are the ones gathered together, at least tonight. Others might listen to this at some point who are not householders. Is the sharp weapons of negative actions turning against us, like parents murdered by the son that they raised? Now it is fitting to always take ordination. But this kind of embracing of the concept of, ordination being a very useful thing. Of course, I've never been ordained, so I can't speak to its utility, but it certainly seems that this tradition at least does embrace the concept of, that being an ideal way to live one's life if you have the proclivity for that. But obviously, the laity, householders do serve a role and can practice Buddhism with similar attitudes as what the ordained have. Again, ordained folks are those who have made a decision to shut off to a large degree the activities of the world, the mundane affairs that we all are still quite involved in, entrenched in at times even, right? And it's not to say that every person who's ordained has the same opportunity to shut themselves off away from all of that. But nonetheless, that is an ideal way to dedicate oneself to the practice of the Dharma. If you have, again, the proclivity for that and the desire to do that with your life, it's embraced as a sort of ideal. It was the way that the Buddha himself formulated a spiritual community, although there were lay practitioners around who benefited from the Buddha's advice and teachings. It was primarily the monastic community of monks and nuns that were kind of at the core of the initial formulation of Buddhism in the world. So let's go to Geshe Japa Gyatso's commentary and see what he says about this. He says, whoops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I was trying to move it down a little, but I forget this sometimes goes down way too quickly. Whenever we encounter the suffering of meeting enemies, not being able to keep our wife at home, our partner, at home, and so forth, reflect upon this, thinking, for example, that it is like parents who raise their only son with kindness from the time he was little, but due to his coming under the power of the afflictions, his anger blazed up even at a mere slight mention of what they wanted or did not want with regard to a situation. And forgetting their past kindness, he harmed them, and worse, even took their lives. So it's like, we've sort of tended to our own self in a similar way. And this is kind of the way I read this analogy, is that we've been like the parents who have tended to a son, the son or daughter, or whoever we want to call it, the offspring is like the diluted sense of self that we've tended to, the self-cherishing that we've been, feeding all the time, as well as the self-grasping, but again, primarily self-cherishing. And it's going to end up harming us in the end, just like the swordsmith is slain by their own sword that they created, and so on. It's a similar type of analogy. So we've raised this thing thinking that it's in our best interest. We're going to see, that coming up in one of the verses later tonight, that this is not really the best interest for ourselves to tend to the self-cherishing mind. In fact, it's the exact opposite, as we've been seeing in all these verses. It only causes us suffering. If we continue to follow this mind, then we're bound to experience suffering. So just like those parents who have tended to that, thinking that you did all of this wonderful stuff to take care of yourself, well, you're only going to create the causes for that harm to come back around to you, just like a son who's betrayed the parents who have tended that son for so long and taken care of him and so on. Okay. So it continues about the middle of that paragraph. When such events happen, whenever we have, difficulty with people in our neighborhood or difficulty with our partners, our relationships, what have you, think, this is the sharp weapons turning against me of the negative actions committed under the power of self-cherishing in previous rebirths, of failing to repay others for their kindness. again, it's a similar type of thing too, in terms of the behavior that we've been doing and engaging in through cherishing ourselves is not repaying others for their kindness. It's only tending to our own benefit, our own, you know, preoccupation with ourself, instead of actually being attentive to the fact that we depend upon so many others for everything that we have in our lives. Okay, so it says, then meditate on taking and giving. From now on, we should enact the completely pure Dharma through always completely emerging, that is, definitely emerging from the dwellings of the laity. In other words, through always taking ordination. So again, it comes back around to emphasize this concept of taking ordination. But as is pointed out, I'll share some commentary in a moment. I mean, that's sort of symbolic of the dedication that we need to have that is driving people, ideally, to take ordination, which is a recognition that the way that we've been going about living our lives is not going to lead to any permanent solution. Essentially, it's pointing to the mind of renunciation. A renunciate is often the term used to refer to those who are ordained, but you can be a renunciate and not be ordained. Lay people can develop renunciation, can develop a sincere desire to turn away from samsara and to liberation, nirvana, and then, of course, on to Buddhahood from there. But the word for renunciation in Tibetan is ngenjong. Ngenjong literally translates into definitely emerging, definite emergence. The idea is that we get a mind that is definite or certain to emerge from samsara, because we are not going to continue to do the garbage that we've been doing. We're not going to keep buying into the playground of samsara, thinking it's a wonderful place to stay, and we're going to see it for what it is, a prison, as we talked about last week, right? So let's go to the slides, and I'll share a few passages from some of the other folks. This is from Venerable Chodron. She says, the remedy to this is to renounce worldly life. This could mean renouncing mundane life and taking monastic ordination, which is often called leaving the householder life and entering the homeless life, right? Because ideally you don't own a home, you don't have a set abode that is indicative of where most laity and householders, are, is to kind of have your own home and home people in the home and possessions and all of that. You become more or less, without a home. Or it could mean that your mind, no matter if you are a lay practitioner or a monastic, relinquishes the attachments of a householder to family, money, possessions, job, house, and so forth, and turns toward nirvana. Because again, these are states of mind. They're not dependent upon external situations, but nonetheless, there's a usefulness for those people who do take ordination in shutting that off, not being so concerned about their hair and their clothes and all that, due to shaving their heads and wearing robes. And, we just don't have the attachment in those positions, being a monk or a nun. You don't have all of these preoccupations and attachment. And then she says, instead of focusing on the happiness of this life or even a good rebirth in psychic existence, you aspire for liberation, or again, to go even beyond that, to full awakening. These are both the results of more sustained practice. Obviously, getting a good rebirth isn't the final result. Liberation isn't even the completely final result, though it's a much more permanent, lasting result. But, we want to go on ideally to even full awakening, complete Buddhahood. All right, now we go on to verse 49. So let me actually take it off of here, and we'll go back to the wonderful little chart that I had up, the outline that I just had up a short while ago. We finished 48 now. Again, we've gone through all of those various verses around karmic cause and effect and the antidotes to what we have been experiencing or are experiencing. And we look at verse 49, which is kind of an interesting verse. It's just sort of recognizing that the real enemy, the real culprit, is self-cherishing. Like, having done all this analysis, if we haven't gotten it by now, then verse 49 is going to shout it out really loud and clear that the problem is our self-cherishing mind. This is what's the culprit behind everything that we've experienced. Now, again, recall that way back in one of the very first class, I think it was, where we looked at how self-cherishing has kind of different dimensions. The coarser form of self-cherishing is usually together with self-grasping. And these two, again, become like twin demons. Very hard to even take them apart because we're working with a misconception of the I and how it exists, and then a holding that I to be very dear and precious with the distortion of the how the I exists. And thereby we create attachment and jealousy and anger and all these various delusions, and we engage in unskillful actions on the basis of that. But there's also this very subtle form of self-cherishing that is not necessarily going to be uh, um, non-virtuous. In fact, the self-cherishing at that level that the Hinayana practitioners have that are engaging in attaining their own liberation is still tainted by that subtle self-cherishing. But nonetheless, it causes them to engage in virtuous activities in order to attain nirvana, self-liberation. So again, we have these kinds of different ways of talking about self-cherishing depending upon what level we are at. But nonetheless, the goal, of course, is to see that both of them are to be abandoned without a doubt, right? It's not that we say, well, let's just work on the coarser level and not the subtler level. The subtler level, though, isn't probably going to be the main obstacle initially. First, we have to stop all of the self-cherishing that is arising with self-grasping and manifesting in these coarser ways. It's causing us to get ourselves in trouble. Everything we've been looking at in this previous section. It's just, showing how much ridiculousness, we are engaged in. We're creating our own suffering constantly through all these various actions that ripen into particular suffering results. But at the very deeper level is this self-cherishing that still is an obstacle for the bodhisattva, even though it can be together with the virtuous minds of a Hinayana practitioner that lead them to attain nirvana and liberation. It nonetheless is not, it's not something bodhisattvas want to cultivate, because that subtler level of self-cherishing will block you from becoming a Buddha. It will not allow you to develop the full mind that cherishes others, that attends to them. And recall that this is a Mahayana text. So that's the emphasis, is to look at how we have to remove the coarser level first, probably really address that, and then also be aware of the subtler level and how it's blocking our attainment of enlightenment. Okay, so let's go to verse 49 in Geshe-la's text, his commentary, and see what he has to say there. So Dhammarakshita's verse, this being the case, everything we've looked at up to this point, right? We seize the enemy. It's like we got him. We know who the enemy is. We seize the thief who deceived us through lying in ambush. We seize the impostor who disguised himself as us. This is what I was mentioning just a short while ago, right? We think that this is somebody who's benefiting us. It's us. It's us who is encouraging us to take care of ourselves, to attend to our own needs first, and so on. But it's an imposter. All the doubt about it being self-cherishing has been cut. It is absolutely self-cherishing that's at the root of all of this. So again, we have three different ways that we're labeling this mind of self-cherishing. It's the enemy that we are seizing. It's the thief who's deceived us, kind of lying in ambush and then attacking us and taking away all of our positive things and positive experiences. And then the imposter, it has a deceptive nature to it. This mind of self-cherishing seems to be leading us to get our happiness. And I think this is why it's so difficult to work with this, because, I mean, it's just like the mind of attachment to some degree as well, right? When we think that we're following something that's feeding our needs, feeding our pleasure, giving us what we want, helping us to be comfortable, helping us to have all the things that we desire, well, then we think that it's our best friend, but it's actually our worst enemy. It's an imposter. It's a fake, right? So we have to, again, see all three dimensions of this. Let's jump back to that and see how Geshe-la explains that. He starts with saying, previously in the verses above, that was again back through verse 10, the faults of self-cherishing were said to be many. Since all of these faults have definitely been seen to be neither an exaggeration or a deprecation, this verse says this being the case. In other words, so we hopefully have seen up to this point through all the ways we've examined it, and even what I shared last week in the teaching from Rinpoche called Bodhisattva Attitude, where he talks about the disadvantages of cherishing oneself and so on. hopefully we can see very clearly and meditate quite strongly on the faults of self-cherishing and see it for what it is. It's not your best friend, folks. It's actually the cause of so much of your suffering. All right. Shantideva says it's actually the cause of all of our suffering. Okay, so the enemy, this is the first line and the first way that we're giving a label to self-cherishing, has until now not been recognized as the enemy. Now, however, by means of the Dharma and the compassion of the Lama, we have recognized the enemy as the enemy. This is the thing that we often, are mistaking the people who are causing us harm as the enemy, right? We think, oh, well, he or she or they, whatever, they're the problem. It has nothing to do with me. If I could just get rid of them, then I would be fine, right? But that's not the enemy. That's a manifestation, again, as we've seen through these verses, of our own negative karma that we've created coming into our sphere of experience as particular people who are harming us or events that are occurring to us. The real enemy is inside ourselves. The real enemy is the mind of self-cherishing. So that's the first one that we're seeing in this verse. This is one of the verses for the homework this week. Then the second line, we have also recognized it to be the worst of thieves who steals the wealth of our virtue. In that, just as having been ambushed by bandits, our wealth is then stolen. Having been invisibly ambushed by this enemy, we have been deceived. Right? That's taken advantage of us. Kind of we let it come in and it's actually a thief. It's actually stealing our happiness. It's not giving us happiness. It's not helping us to get happiness. It's stealing it. It's taking it away. Then finally, the third line where we see that's like an imposter disguising itself as ourselves. It has been very difficult to recognize. Through acting as though it were us, it has deceived us by pretending to be beneficial through cherishing us. Right? It's like we think that it's acting in our best interest. Just like when you were young and maybe a parent or a grandparent or somebody, really took care of you, you kind of think, oh, I want that, someone to kind of take care of me. And as we grew up, we came to depend upon our own self-cherishing mind as doing that for us, right? So now we rely upon this mistaken friend, this imposter who pretends to go after what it is that will bring happiness, but it's only going after what will bring us suffering, right? Because the true causes of happiness are to abandon self-cherishing, are to abandon, of course, self-grasping as well, which is the deeper error. But self-cherishing is not acting in your best interest. It's not really you. It's a distorted view of you. If we look at both of these minds, the self-cherishing and self-grasping mind, essentially what they are doing is, in a way, at their kind of very sort of simple form, they are both working with a concept of an I, which is the only way that the I exists. It's a thought of I in relation to this combination of stuff, what we often call, again, the aggregates, the five aggregates, which can be boiled down to mental aggregates, physical aggregates, that we have a mind and we have a body. The mind and the body are labeled, designated as an I, and the mind of self-cherishing holds that I to be most important, thinks that this sense of an I is much more important than the sense of other, those things that we label as other. Then the self-grasping is also beginning, at least in the initial step, it is looking at just a merely designated I, a merely imputed I, an I that is simply a label given to this collection of stuff. And it thinks it exists in reality. It thinks it has substantial, objective existence, that it exists independently. We're going to look at that more when we get to the final verses in this course, and we examine ultimate bodhicitta and how to develop the wisdom of emptiness. But if we kind of look at them in their pure forms, they do come together again, and that's when we have a lot of trouble, right? Because the self-cherishing mind is working with a reified sense of an I. And so then delusions and other things arise quite easily because we are adhering to a real sense of I together with this strong sense of self-centeredness. And that becomes problematic, these twin demons. And that's mainly what we've been talking about, is when self-cherishing is driven together with self-grasping. But as I said earlier, self-cherishing can also be there at a very subtle level and can even be there absent of self-grasping. Because again, those Hinayana practitioners can be completely free of it and still have this subtle form of being focused on one's own needs to the exclusion of others. So these two minds are observing what exists at a very, very subtle level, very slight level, the I that is merely imputed, merely designated, and they are distorting it. The self-cherishing mind distorts it in the ways in terms of making it most important, thinking that it's our dearest friend, not seeing that it's an enemy, an imposter, a thief. It actually steals our happiness. It's not acting in our best interest. Yeah. That's what this verse is telling us. It's like we have to, at this point, if we haven't gotten it yet, hopefully this verse kind of pounds it in through these three labels. It's an enemy, it's a thief, it's an imposter. It's the one you want to be rid of, not the one you want to hang out with and say, come with me, self-cherishing mind, please take care of me. Just like your, grandma or someone would take care of you when you were young. It's not the same thing at all. It's your own ruin by following this mind. It's not going to bring you the happiness that you seek. All right. So let's continue on with Geshe-la's commentaries, just one little bit at the end there. Until recently, without understanding it to be like that, we have mistaken it to be a definite benefactor, whereupon we have come under its power, right? Which is seduced by the mind of self-cherishing, and we follow it everywhere. We don't even question it usually. Most people don't question it at all. Now, however, we have recognized it to be an imposter who has disguised itself as us. So again, these three things are really important to see in terms of it being an enemy, a thief, an imposter, and they all they have slightly different shades of meaning, right? In other words, until now, most of us have not fully understood it to be the enemy, and even though some have understood this slightly, they still have very many doubts that have not been cut regarding whether or not it is an enemy. Now, however, due to having decisively recognized it, we see the Dharma and the Guru as marvelous and say, ah, that was in that last line, right? Where it said, ah, all the doubt about it being self-cherishing has been cut. That's because the Dharma and the Guru has revealed it to be so. And again, we have to see it for ourselves. It's not just because somebody says that the self-cherishing mind is your problem that you accept it. You have to see it through everything that we've analyzed up to this point, that it's behind all of these various actions. And those actions, again, have led to your own suffering. Again, since we have now determined the main enemy to be just that, all doubt regarding it being or not being the enemy has been cut. Again, the mind of doubt is a mind that wavers between two things. Is self-cherishing the enemy, or isn't it an enemy? Is it a friend, actually? And so no doubt should remain in the mind at this point. We should have a single point in mind that sees that self-cherishing is, again, without a doubt, the enemy is the problem, is something that we have to be very much on the lookout for and diminish and eventually eliminate. All right, let's go to some slides. I don't think I have much to share on this. Not sure I have any. I think I do. Again, we're in that section where this is just a single verse where we have this recognition of the enemy of self-cherishing. I already read that. Yeah, I do have a little bit from Venerable Chodron. I put some of these slides in today, so I think I've forgotten where some of them are that I added. These two, again, self-cherishing and self-grasping, because you can include both of them. We've been mainly focused on self-cherishing, but they both are rising together so frequently in our minds that it's perfectly fine to refer to both of them as the enemy. These two are so insidious because they are disguised as myself. This is that third part in particular about them being like an imposter. That is, we think that they are us in fear that if we give them up, we will be no one. Right? We kind of are not wanting to let that go, or we have this other idea that people often think that, oh, if I don't watch out for myself, then everybody's just going to step all over me. I'm going to be a doormat. I won't have any happiness whatsoever. Right? However, she says, by examining the situation with wisdom, with insight, we will see that counteracting these culprits will not destroy either our existence, right? You're going to still be here after realizing this and getting rid of the twin demons, or our happiness. It's not going to destroy your happiness. In fact, as she says, our lives will be more peaceful and beneficial for both ourselves and for others. I think this is the hard thing too, sometimes in our spiritual practice. Let me take it off screen for a moment. We taste the happiness of Dharma to some degree as we practice it. I'm not saying that that's, out of the scope of our experience, but nonetheless, there still is a lot we have to do to kind of get to a place where we really see the joy and the happiness of Dharma blossoming in very, very profound ways. I was always inspired hearing people who've done even just long meditation retreats, and they've developed some of these stages of calming the mind, focusing the mind, and already are experiencing an unbelievable sense of bliss and well-being that most of us don't know at all. And everything that we call happiness and pleasure is really coarse compared to that. And it's so contingent upon particular situations and sense objects and what have you. But we keep investing in all of that and not putting our time and dedication into developing the deeper happiness that comes from practicing the Dharma. So it does take a little bit of, I won't call it quite a leap of faith, but it's nonetheless some level of faith where we say, okay, I trust that all these other practitioners, that the Buddha himself, that Dharma-Rakshita, that our great teachers, all of these beings are telling the truth, that there's something on the other side of that we can get to, that we can begin to taste now. Again, I'm not saying you don't taste it now, because hopefully you have, as you've been practicing Dharma for however many years, begun to see how much the mind can be at peace when we're not following these delusions and not buying into the self-cherishing mind. But sometimes initially it feels like, well, but what's in it for me? How am I getting anything out of this? You will have a much more peaceful mind, a much happier mind, a more joyful mind if you let go of these states of mind. There is something on the other side that is well worth investing in. And we should be doing it solely from that perspective. Oh, I want it all for me, because that means we're following the self-cherishing mind again. But we can kind of have some consolation that this is what's on the other side of all of this. If we practice in this way, we're going to be blissed out beings. I mean, look at His Holiness. His Holiness is always such a wonderful example of somebody who lives his life in incredible joy and well-being. Right. And there's times when he's a little more serious and he sheds some tears even at the situations he sees in our world and the way that beings harm each other and what have you. But nonetheless, he's pretty blissed out. So we have to have kind of some buying into this idea that there's a happiness of the Dharma that is something that we haven't really tasted completely yet. And when you get to the place where you're actually developing the insight into emptiness at a very deep level, they say that the experience of that is unbelievable in terms of how much you sort of weight you've dropped off to the side because you're no longer burdened by so many of these mistaken ideas. So we have to, again, I'm just putting out a little pep talk, maybe for myself, as well as for all of you, as to how we have to approach this topic of just dedicating ourselves to finding that happiness that's on the other side of our practice. It's not always there immediately. Then she says something very similar to what Geshe-la was saying. Due to the kindness of the Buddha, who shared with us the medicine of the Dharma, as well as our spiritual mentors, our gurus, we have seen the truth. For countless lifetimes, we have been wandering in psychic existence, following whatever impulsive thought came into our mind, unable to discern wholesome from unwholesome thoughts and actions, right? We've just been at the mercy of our ridiculous self-cherishing and self-grasping and all the other delusions that arise, in tandem with them. It is only because we have met a spiritual mentor who has kindly opened our eyes to the Buddha's teachings that we have been able to correctly identify the source of all our pain and misery. Just kind of adding that, and Geshe-la did mention that in his commentary too, right, about the gurus and how important the gurus are, because the gurus have actually pointed us in the right direction. And most of us have some experience of being around these, beings who very well could be enlightened. If they're not, then I'm not sure who is. But anyway, beings who have demonstrated that they've deepened their practice of the Dharma to a degree where they are living entirely from that space of well-being and happiness. Every time I was in Rinpoche's presence, I mean, I didn't feel like for a moment there was ever any like decline in his well-being and joy. And there was also, of course, never any moment where I saw him cherishing himself. And I was amazed at how many, maybe some of you have seen Rinpoche teach for hours. He'd be teaching for hours and he wouldn't even like change his sitting position. Well, everyone in the audience is at least changing their sitting position at least 15, 20 times during those same, period of time. It was just impossible to kind of sit there and just endure that. But he's just blissed out. He's not in any state of discomfort or anything. So again, I think we have the evidence, the proof in these beings. All right, and we can be grateful to them, as was said by Dharmarakshita and Venerable Chodron and Geshe Jumpa Gyatso in their commentaries. Now we're entering into another long section that has a refrain to it. We had kind of that 4-line structure to most of this first section we looked at. We have a couple of verses at the beginning. That's verses 50 through 54 that we're going to try to make it through tonight that don't have this pattern with the refrain. And one of them, I think it's 52, does introduce the refrain. But then we're going to go from 55 all the way to 90 with a refrain where we're kind of looking at various things, aspects of this mind that we want to seek Yamantaka's aid, this being who represents the fully enlightened mind that is bodhicitta and all of its manifestation, both conventional and ultimate, being able to help us to overcome these. So let's go into this section. Again, I'm going to first go back to the chart just to show you. Again, we're entering into 50 through 90. 55 through 90 will be a more specific thing where we have this repeat of this refrain. But this is where we're requesting Yamantaka to remove self-cherishing and self-grasping. Again, the Buddhas, Yamantaka is a fully enlightened being, tantric being, as we talked about earlier. The Buddhas don't remove our distorted states of mind from their side. They can't do that. All they can do is teach the Dharma and help us to wake up to our situation so we can do the work to remove those states of mind. So that's just to make sure there's no confusion about this. We're not asking Yamantaka, you can ask him, you can do whatever you want. You can ask him to come in and, abolish your self-cherishing without you having to do a thing. But that's not how it's going to work. We have to create the causes and conditions. As I was saying in the meditation tonight, our minds are the product of what we do. And so if we want to continue to experience all these various sufferings, and we just keep doing what we've been doing. If we want to reverse that and actually be a benefit to others and achieve our greatest potential, then we have to do the opposite. We have to engage in all the teachings and practice that will help us to be free of those states of mind. Let's go to Geshe-la's commentary on this. Now, he takes this verse and he divides it up, verse 50, into individual lines. So line A, the first line of verse 50, says, now spin the sharp weapons of actions overhead. This is kind of like this idea of Yamantaka becoming a force for us to have the two minds of conventional and ultimate bodhicitta, as well as to kind of bring those two minds together to become the wheel of sharp weapons that overcomes the twin demons. It says there, by means of such reasons, spin the sharp weapons of negative actions overhead is an exhortation to the great wrathful one, Yamantaka, that says, destroy the enemy, self-cherishing, into nothingness. Now, again, as we go through this, some of the commentaries mention the self-grasping and self-cherishing. Some say just self-grasping and not self-cherishing. Some say self-cherishing, not self-grasping. But recognize that that's the fluidity of these two states of mind. They're often arising as twin demons. And so the main focus in this section does seem to be primarily on self-cherishing, but you will see self-grasping isolated at times. Okay, so now spin the sharp weapons of actions overhead. We're like wanting Yamantaka to do his work, do what you can to help us to cultivate these minds that will overcome these demons, especially self-cherishing. Then it says, furiously spin them 3 times overhead. Out of fury at that final object of wrath, he spins the sharp weapons, his implements, 3 times overhead in order to symbolize demolishing the enemy with the two types of bodhicitta, mind of enlightenment, which again are conventional and ultimate, and then the third, which is their unification. Now, again, you don't have, according to Sutra, the full unification of conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta in a sense of what we call kind of method and wisdom. You don't have them fully united until you get to Buddhahood. On the tantric path, you are practicing the union of those two constantly, though, and trying to bring them together into one state of mind. But at the deeper level, again, what happens is as you realize emptiness, you can achieve that state of mind where you are recognizing the exact antidote to your self-grasping. But you can't ever maintain that full awareness when you come back out of meditation. So you are constantly going back and forth between method and wisdom, the wisdom that you cultivate on the cushion that realizes emptiness, and then the method aspect when you are off the cushion and engaging in various actions. Of course, you're influenced by your wisdom, just as you're influenced by the method side of it, the conventional bodhicitta and all those activities. But you don't really get a full union of the two until Buddhahood. But we're kind of wanting Yamataka as the symbol of this fully enlightened being to inspire us to engage in conventional bodhicitta, ultimate bodhicitta, and then bring those two together in the full culmination of becoming just like Yamataka, becoming a Buddha. So then let's go back and we'll finish this commentary, and then I'll go through my slides on this just to reiterate some of the points. Then we have line C. Spread your legs, the two truths. He's got two legs and some images of Yamataka in the tantric form that people often work with. It's got many more legs. Yamataka has, I don't know, 16 on each side, I think, or something. I can't remember the exact number. Then it says, open wide your eyes, method and wisdom. So these both have a meaning. The two legs being the two truths, and the two eyes that are even and equally open are method and wisdom, the two aspects of the path. So Geshe-la says, due to symbolizing the conventional mind of enlightenment, his right leg is bent. And actually, the right side is said to be in highest Yoga Tantra associated with the method side of the path. And then, due to symbolizing the ultimate mind of enlightenment, Geshe-la says, his left leg is extended. So this is again the wisdom wing that is associated with the left side of the body and left actions. So right and left in highest Yoga Tantra take on meanings around method and wisdom respectively. Whereupon his legs are spread apart, right? So you have kind of this two aspects of his legs that represent the two bodhicittas, the two minds of enlightenment. Likewise, in order to symbolize the need for equal parts of the two, which is kind of a bringing them together into a union, method, the conventional mind of enlightenment, and wisdom, the ultimate mind of enlightenment, his two eyes are open equally wide, right? They're meant to be equal and balanced. We have to apply both method and wisdom. You might think one is more important than the other, but you need both to become a Buddha, just like you need the two wings of a bird for the bird to fly to the island of enlightenment. The last line of this verse 50, bearing the fangs of the four powers, his teeth that are four in number, that represent the four opponent powers, pierce the enemy. Through bearing the four fangs that symbolize the four powers, pierce the self-cherishing, the enemy itself. So again, let's take a look at the slides because I have some nice little pictures to go with this so you can get an appreciation for Yamataka. Maybe with it being Halloween, we should have all come as Yamataka tonight. Get your inner Yamataka out. Okay, so we are entering into this section with this verse requesting Yamataka to remove self-cherishing and self-grasping. Again, this is the full verse. Let me read it as it is. Now spin the sharp weapons of actions overhead. Furiously spin them 3 times overhead. Spread your legs, the two truths. Open wide your eyes, method and wisdom. Bearing the fangs of the four powers, pierce the enemy. Again, it's kind of violent imagery, but this is what we want to do is we want to have this kind of no mercy attitude towards these demons. Again, we're not being violent towards ourselves. We're being violent towards these states of mind, not in a traditional or more mundane way of being violent, but just showing no mercy. Raise the weapon of action refers to, this is again, I'm maybe give a little introduction to this. What's kind of interesting is that there are different commentaries with different things said. This isn't in Geshe-la's commentary. We already kind of looked at some of the initial things in terms of the commentary. But the kind of this very first line where he's Dharma-Rakshita says we want Yamataka to raise the weapons, to kind of use these weapons. Venerable Chodron relates this to what are often called the four activities. They're talked about a lot in Tantra again. As I mentioned many times, this text has a lot of tantric imagery and allusions, things that are being referred to that are from the tantric tradition. And these four activities are kind of the ways in which we can ourselves seek to do these for others, but also to try to be influenced by our gurus and holy beings to help us on our path, to do whatever is necessary for us to be able to overcome our own obstacles. So let's look at how Venerable Chodron goes through these. You may have heard these before, seen them in various pujas. The first one of the four actions is pacifying actions, pacifying negativities. Obviously, that's an important way sometimes that we're benefited, is helping us to pacify our negative states of mind and what have you. The second is increasing our merit, increasing our positive potential, our more virtuous aspects. The third is influencing others to guide them on the correct path. This is what we're often seeking in others, right? Is for them to, our gurus, to influence me, help me on the correct path, help me to steer my mind in the right direction, because sometimes it's not so clear what we should be doing. And then fourth is to use a more wrathful approach, to forcefully destroy hindrances, right? Because that's an important thing at times. This is often called wrathful action. So we have pacifying actions, increasing. The third one's often called controlling or influencing here, but controlling. And then fourth, wrathful actions. These four actions are things that we want to be able to do for others, but we want to also seek our gurus and the holy beings to do for us, because they are the ways in which the Buddhas can, holy beings can help us, and the ways we can help others when we have the skill and ability to do that. So Venerable Chodron continues, he says, we request Yamataka to employ whichever of these methods will be most effective to lead us on the path, right? Because even if it's wrathful stuff, even if we have to have, the hammer come down, we want to have whatever we need. We want the gurus to give us exactly the medicine we need at that particular time. Okay, so to go through the rest of this, it says again, this idea of spinning the weapon 3 times. It says, furiously spin them 3 times overhead. This is the second line. The first line was kind of what Venerable Chodron was commenting on. Now spin the sharp weapons of actions overhead. Spin them, furiously spin them 3 times overhead. Spinning them 3 times once more is to look at the idea of conventional bodhicitta, ultimate bodhicitta, and then the union of the two, which, as I mentioned, really occurs in complete Buddhahood. The 2 legs spread wide. These are the 2 truths. Conventional truth, the right leg, and ultimate truth, the left leg, which again is how we usually associate things in Tantra and highest yoga Tantra. The right hand conduct, right-sided, is more conventional method, and so on. And then the left is the wisdom side of it, the ultimate truth, the ultimate knowledge of the emptiness of everything that is a conventional truth. Again, there's always a conventional truth together with its own ultimate truth, its emptiness. Conventional truths are the things, going back to, I talked earlier tonight about how the I, that is kind of the object that is distorted by these states of mind, is merely imputed. All phenomena in the end are merely designated. Anything that exists is existing simply because of a conceptual designation on a basis. So again, I have this, little wrist mala. I hope you don't hear me playing with it. Sometimes I have it in my hand when I'm teaching. This little wrist mala, again, is a designation of wrist mala to this collection of 21 beads, and then the guru bead and the string and everything that kind of puts it all together, that makes it into what we call a wrist mala. Everything has a conventional nature, which in the end is a mere designation, a mere imputation on a basis. From the side of the basis, there is nothing that is wrist mala. Wrist mala is a concept, a term, a label we give to this. an idea that we formulate around this. We organize our world into all these various things and give them labels because we need to relate to the world around us. We need to be able even to communicate with each other. I couldn't talk to you about the Dharma if we didn't have labels, right? And we have to label this as the first noble truth, and that is, self-cherishing, and da da da. We have all these labels for things. Everything that is merely labeled, that's its conventional truth, is together with its ultimate truth, which is its emptiness of inherent existence. These two exist together, kind of inseparably on the same base. So we have the Ristmala and the emptiness of Ristmala existing here together with this base. The one as a label, the other as a quality of the Ristmala, which is that it doesn't exist independently on its own from the side of the base. It's merely designated, merely imputed. So if we look at it from that point of view, it's conventional. If we look at it from the negation of it having any inherent existence, that's its ultimate nature. That's the ultimate truth. So again, we have these two legs of Yamantaka that are representing these two truths as the basis upon which all of reality stands. It's not just all emptiness, it's emptiness and things appearing within emptiness. So as I mentioned, you see all the various legs there. I couldn't find a single image that had just two legs. I guess there are some of Yamantaka, but usually I think it's 16, maybe it's 16 in total, 8 on each side. Anyway, I can't remember. It looks more like 8 on each side when I look at it in the picture now. So the next slide, we have the two eyes wide. Remember this, it said, after spread your legs, the two truths, it said, open wide your eyes, method and wisdom. So again, Yamantaka's two wide open eyes are the aspects of method of the path, and then the aspects of wisdom, which again can be correlated to conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta, respectively. But this is kind of encompassing the entire method aspect of the path, which is a necessity to practice along with the wisdom aspect. Then the four fangs are the four opponent powers. Now it's kind of interesting that they identify these as the four opponent powers. We did talk about them when we went through the, whoops, I didn't mean to go there back. When we went through this, let me take it off this for just a second. We went through those verses that pertain to these experiences that we're having that are suffering, and how if we're identifying that as something that is a pattern that we've created, then we need to do some purification perhaps, especially if we're still creating those patterns that are going to ripen into future sufferings, just like what were described in those verses from 10 through 45, right? So purification through the four opponent powers is an important kind of practice to engage in to overcome our negative karma. But remember that the ultimate purification comes when we apply not just a conventional understanding of how actions arise on the basis of our various mind states and so on, but also the wisdom of emptiness. That's kind of the final or ultimate purification. So I think it's ideally being seen here as even a stronger form of purification than just the four opponent powers as we might generally practice them. We need to apply, and in many purification practices, they even do recommend at the end, like a brief reflection on the emptiness of what are called the three spheres. I, the creator of the karma, the action of creating that karma, and the karma that is created, all of these being empty of inherent existence. We have to practice kind of bringing the wisdom aspect into the method of purification through the four opponent powers. So I don't need to go into the four opponent powers again. I went through them previously in this course, and there's lots of information out there about them. I think I even passed along the Vajrasattva practice, I think, that Colleen kindly got out to everybody from Venerable Rabina about how to work with the four opponent powers in a very methodical way. Generally, we do that at the end of our day as a means of purifying so that we can go to bed knowing that we've put our karma in shape before we close our eyes. Okay. This is a little chart that came from Good Karma, the Venerable Children's book. I just thought it was a nice one that kind of shows these things all lining up. So we have a basis upon which we practice the path, conventional truths and ultimate truths. Conventional truths are karma and rebirth and death and mind and compassion, all the various things that we have. These are all conventional truths, right? They are on the method aspect of the path. The principal enemy that we're vanquishing through these practices in this context in particular is the self-centered attitude. Hope it should say attitude, not added to. I missed a D in there. Okay, then we have what is being practiced as part of that method aspect is renunciation, compassion, bodhicitta, generosity, ethical conduct, fortitude, being attentive to, what causes us to move in the right direction of enlightenment, to gain good rebirths, to be free from our own suffering, all these various mind states that are part of our path. They are all based on conventional truths, and they result in the collection of merit. Now, Rinpoche these days, Rinpoche's again has passed, but in his more recent teachings, he was actually calling both these collections merits. One was the merit of virtue, which is the top one, and merit of wisdom, the bottom one. But the merit of virtue is what we are collecting by engaging in those states of mind. And they result in the end in what are called the form bodies. The form bodies are the ways in which Buddhas are then able to manifest to benefit others out of that compassion that they practiced on the learning path. This is what's called the enjoyment body and the emanation body. The enjoyment body is a body that exists in a pure land that Arya bodhisattvas who have attained a direct realization into emptiness can manifest there and partake of the teachings from that enjoyment body. Emanation bodies are all the other ways that Buddhas are able to benefit sentient beings, ordinary beings like ourselves, as well as any being, various emanations of that Buddha. In terms of ultimate truths, which are the basis for the wisdom aspect of the path, that, of course, is the antidote principally to self-grasping ignorance, the self-grasping mind, the second of the twin demons. The practicing of that is meditating on emptiness. Again, we'll go into the reasonings around emptiness a little bit when we get to the final section. We've mainly focused on the top part of this chart. And that, of course, causes us to collect the requisite wisdom that we need in order to actualize what is called the truth body. Truth body is often referred to in the Sanskrit of Dharmakaya. The Dharmakaya of the Buddha is the fully developed wisdom of that Buddha. That is the culmination of the Buddha's practice of realizing emptiness, first conceptually and then eventually directly, non-conceptually. So, of course, the truth body is also endowed with all the other qualities. This is like a general schema for how these two aspects manifest. We often talk about like the basis, which is the two truths, then the path, which is the various things that we engage in, and then the fruit. The fruit is for the method aspect, the ability to have form bodies, to be able to manifest to benefit sentient beings. And in terms of the wisdom aspect, to have the truth body, the Dharmakaya, that is the fully developed mind of a Buddha, that is the culmination of our own welfare, but moreover is the source from which the form bodies are then able to to be generated, and the Buddha then knows exactly how to manifest to benefit beings to the greatest degree. So I'm not going to go into a whole thing on this. The other course I happen to be teaching at the same time for Thupten Norbu Ling on Thursdays is on the Tathagata essence, which is Buddha nature. And in that course, we've been going into a lot of the teachings around the bodies of a Buddha, these kayas. Don't think always physical bodies. They're just kind of an aspect of the experience of a Buddha. But there's that one side that is the wisdom that manifests in the Dharmakaya. The other side manifests in the form of the Rupakayas, the form bodies that again are twofold in terms of how they're classified. But Buddhas can manifest in any form. They can be in the form of a bridge or a stone or a car or whatever it is that would be a benefit to beings if the karma is there for them to have that manifestation. So anyway, this chart is an interesting little one, and you might benefit from looking at Venerable Chodron's book in that section. Again, that was right around page 210, I think it says. Got something down there in front of this, so I can 218, sorry. I'm going to move that back up to the top because it's my little thing from Zoom that I'm keeping at the bottom generally. I wanted to also share a little bit from Geshe Sopa's book Peacock and the Poison Grove, because this isn't really in Geshe-la's commentary, Geshe Jampa Gyatso's commentary, but having recited all this and having that understanding of what all these things represent, this is how he concludes this section. He says, "You should think then, oh, mighty Lord Yamataka, this influence of these enlightened beings that's there to help us. Please help me. You are the Lord over death and the perfect wisdom that can eliminate my inner enemies. You are the knower of the two truths, the destroyer of ignorance. Please attack my view of a real personal identity and self-cherishing attitude. Again, my twin demons, my self-grasping and self-cherishing. Kill them, destroy them, stamp them out. Help me get rid of the two enemies that have been plaguing me since time began. Please replace these two demons with the two bodhicittas, right? With the two minds that we're striving to develop through these Lojong teachings, conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. All right. So I just added those in there because I think it's important that we see that these verses aren't just kind of recognizing that these are all these various, this is the meaning of the two legs spread and the two eyes and da, da, da. It's like you're making a request here to Yamataka, like, help me out here. I need whatever inspiration, whatever blessings, whatever benefits you can give me to help me on my own path of awakening. That's where, again, understand that, as I keep emphasizing, it's not that the Buddhas awaken you from their side, but it's not also that you do all the work from your side without any aid or benefit from those enlightened beings. It's the interconnectedness of those beings who've gone to the other shore and us on the shore that was waiting to go to be with them, to have that same experience, and then to help others get to that shore as well. And that's what the whole path is about, is to benefit from others who are on the other side in the way that we want to then benefit others who are still on our side, So, all right. So let's go on. It's a bit of a long section there to look at that verse 50. We have a little bit more of kind of picking apart the next verse as well. 51. O king of the knowledge mantras that torment the enemy. I kind of don't explain this so much, but knowledge mantras are apparently kind of like another text said king of spells. The idea is that we have these various things that can act as sometimes maybe malevolent forces, black magic kind of things, but it's an analogy to things that might be able to destroy an enemy. And in this case, we're asking for Yamataka to put forward those sorts of things to help us torment the enemy, to help us destroy the enemy. Geshe-la says, just as there are many knowledge mantras that torment enemies through the rituals of mantra, to cherish others through neglecting ourselves is the king of the knowledge mantras, right? That's the ultimate tool, secret weapon to overcome cherishing oneself, is to cherish others and neglect ourselves. Don't put ourselves first. Put ourselves at the bottom and hold others most dear, most supreme. That destroys the enemy. What is it that is tormented by the knowledge mantras? This is the next 3 lines of this verse. The cruel one, called the insidious demon of self-grasping. Here you'll notice that self-grasping is in the text, but it's because it's together with self-cherishing. These two are twin demons, remember. This cruel one runs uncontrollably in the jungle of psychic existence, brandishing the sharp weapons of actions. So Geshe-la explains this. He says, self-cherishing itself is what is tormented. This enemy, through our listening to whatever it says, as though it were the orders of a great lord, makes us run without even the slightest control in the abodes of the densely overgrown jungle of suffering psychic existence. Remember, we had the jungle of suffering of psychic existence at the beginning of the text with the peacocks, right? The insidious demon of self-grasping, which is like that, which is like self-cherishing, is the two then, both self-cherishing and self-grasping, that are the root of our own and others' ruin. The self-grasping that apprehends the self that is abandoned by the hearers and solitary realizers, and especially the cruel, insidious demon of self-cherishing that again is abandoned in coarser levels by those who are hearers and solitary realizers on the Hinayana path, but it's not abandoned at the deepest level, the subtlest level. Again, and bodhisattvas abandon both completely, self-grasping and self-cherishing. And the final verse of this one has 5 lines. Summon this pledge breaker who brings about my own and others' ruin. This self-cherishing mind that is behind us breaking all of our pledges, all of our vows, our commitments, our dedication to practice, it's all falling to ruin. because we don't do what's proper. We follow the mind of self-cherishing instead. So Geshe-la says, not only does it bring about our own ruin through utterly demolishing us, right? Due to being under its power, we also rarely enact others' welfare. This is the insidiousness of this mind of self-cherishing. It destroys us through causing us to engage in negative actions that cause our own suffering and keep us bound in samsara. But moreover, we aren't able to enact others' welfare at all. Though pretending to do something, it may incidentally happen. We may occasionally be a benefit to others, but generally it's only looking out for ourselves and neglecting the needs of others. Geshe-la continues, he says, through only thinking may the excellent happen to me. We do not accomplish others' welfare properly at all, due to which it also brings about others' ruin, right? Therefore, we say, summon that very enemy, the pledge breaker who is like that, without letting him run wild. Just don't give all of your control over to these minds, especially the mind of self-cherishing. We've been doing it since beginningless time. If it really had our best interest in mind, we would have achieved well-being by now, right? Because we've been under the control of this mind forever. And it hasn't brought about any greater level of happiness. In any particular life, you might look at it and say, oh, well, I did it, kind of keep chasing after my own happiness, and I managed to stay somewhat happy from the time I was born till the time I died. But where did you go from there? You don't know. You might have plummeted to a hell realm on the basis of having only followed that mind of self-cherishing and stepped on other people along the way, right? So again, this is the problem with this mind, that we have to seek Yamataka's aid in overcoming it. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, I didn't have anything for that. That's good. Summon it, wrathful Yamataka. Strike it, pierce the heart of the enemy and the self. Rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin, to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Maraya. These last two lines in this are going to be repeated. I think that's what I say in the next line. Note that this refrain will be repeated from verses 55 through 90, rant and rave, and so on. Let's look at how Geshe-la described that, Geshe-Jampa Gyatso, in his commentary, and then we'll come back and read his commentary. This is his commenting on his commentary, so these aren't words that we're actually going to see when we go back to his published commentary. He says, because self-cherishing brings about our own and others' ruin, we ask Yamataka to stomp angrily on the head of this bad conception. That's where we have this idea of rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin. Like, abolish it already. Do away with it. To the hearts, that's in the last line of this refrain, the heart refers to the mode of apprehension of self-grasping and the mode of apprehension of self-cherishing. What's a mode of apprehension? Again, I mentioned earlier, and I did this for a purpose, that you have this I, this mere I, that is the basis for both of these thoughts, right? We are kind of the object that we are observing is the mere I that is labeled on the basis of this collection of stuff. Of course, it can be distorted with other ignorance and what have you, but that's really all that's there, is the mere I, the merely imputed I. There's an I that we're observing for the self-cherishing mind. The same I is being observed for the self-grasping mind. But the mode of apprehending it is that the I that is apprehended by self-cherishing thinks that that I is most important, right? More important than others. And so we hold it very dear and take care of it and tend to it and so on. The I that is held by the self-grasping, it is observing the mere I, but it has a mode of apprehending it. That is to think that it inherently exists, that it exists from its own side. The mode of apprehension is the way in which a particular object is being apprehended, being known in a sense, though it can't be known, truthfully, because the I doesn't exist inherently, and the I isn't the most important. They're both fictitious minds. They're both imposters. They're both distorted states of mind. All right. So I know we're getting through a lot of stuff tonight. That's a lot of words, but let's go back to, what was I working with? Was I working with Yeah, the slides. So again, when we say we want to go to the hearts, let me see if I can find it in my notes here, to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Marayan. So we say to the hearts, we want, like Yamataka, these two bodhicittas, to go right to the heart, right to the way of apprehending that is mistaken, and get us to see that the self that is being grasped doesn't exist, and the self that we're cherishing isn't the most important, that actually others are more important, and so on. Okay. Of the enemy, to the hearts of the enemy, the self, the enemy, the self in this particular context, Geshe-la says, is taken to be self-grasping. That is the ignorance that apprehends the self, the person, and all phenomena to be inherently existent. Right? Because this is one of the twin demons. They haven't talked about this demon again quite as much as the other one, the self-cherishing, but it's being brought forward here as one of the two things that we want Yamantaka to destroy. Go to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner. The executioner here is taken to be self-cherishing, which is likened to a sword-wielding executioner, sent by the enemy, self-grasping, to kill us. Because we can say again that these two are arising together, these twin demons. Remember, we had an earlier, I think it was in relation to verse 7 or something, where we saw that you had a slightly different relationship of these two. But these two are twin demons, and they're very deceptive and then tricky, and they kind of change roles. And one seems to be the leader, and the other is the follower, sent later. And then that reverses, and this one is the leader, and that one's the follower. In this context, we're seeing that the mind of self-grasping is the enemy, and it's like evil henchman is the executioner, the self-cherishing that kind of destroys so much of our happiness. But these two, again, are working in tandem. Let me see, I might have like one more slide left on this, and then we'll go through Geshe-la's commentary and then do some discussion. The last slide, Maraya. The Sanskrit word Maraya literally means kill. We're saying, kill it already. Kill these two demons. All right. And we'll go on to verse 53 next week. Let's do Geshe-la's commentary on this because we didn't do all of that yet. We have verse 52. Summon it, summon it. By the way, anytime they use these kind of twice, saying something twice, it means in relation to both aspects, the conventional truth, the conventional bodhicitta, and then the ultimate bodhicitta, right? Summon it is said two times in this context, the first being from the point of view of the conventional, and the second from the point of view of the ultimate. That is, in order to be freed from self-cherishing by means of the two minds of enlightenment, the conventional and the ultimate, we say, wrathful Yamantaka, summon the enemy, self-cherishing. Bring him here, let's annihilate him once and for all. Let's do our work, do the job on him. Strike it, pierce the heart of the enemy and the self. Strike it is also said twice for a similar reason to the above. In the context of stating the enemy and the self, the enemy is taken to be self-cherishing and the self to be self-grasping, which is actually the opposite of how it is in the final line. That's what's a little tricky about this verse in particular. We said in the last line, when I went through it on the slides, that the enemy was the self-grasping, but it was together with the self, so it's tricky. Let's go to that line just real quickly. It's right at the top of the screen there. To the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner. They're both enemies. That's what's kind of tricky about the word usage here. But essentially, whenever we use the word the self in this context, we're going to mean self-grasping. The enemy is the mind of self-cherishing in this line, verse B, but the word enemy is used later to refer to self-grasping. And we use executioner as the word that we're going to refer to the mind of self-cherishing. Okay, I know that was just a little confusing there, but since the two, like a lord and servant, or like a lord and lady, are the same in giving us advice that brings about our ruin, in other words, they're twin demons, we say, pierce the hearts of these two. So we're after both of them. And as I said, they're going to take on different labels and different identifications as we go through various ways of working on them and doing away with them. Verse C, rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin. To rant and rave on the head of the bad conception, the self-cherishing that, as was explained above, brings about our own and others' ruin, is to stomp angrily on it. The reason for saying the two, rant and rave, is similar, right? We want to use conventional and ultimate bodhicittas to overcome these. That one seemed to, again, more clearly identify self-cherishing as the main culprit. But once more, that will be the case throughout this section where we see self-cherishing, self-grasping interchanged, sometimes just one, sometimes two. To the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner, Maraya. The enemy, the self of this line, is taken to be the enemy that is self-grasping, and the executioner is taken to be self-cherishing, which is like a sword-wielding executioner sent by the enemy to the hearts of these two, Maraya, kill. In other words, slay them through striking their heart-like vital point, the uncommon mode of apprehension of these two. I just talked about this mode of apprehension again. We want to do the exact opposite, the way that the mind of self-cherishing is apprehending the I as being most important. We want to hold others most important and neglect the I, not hold the I as dear. Over here, we want to take this mode of apprehension that thinks that the I is real and substantial and existing inherently, independently, and think it's the exact opposite. It's empty of all of those. It lacks all of those. So I know it's a lot of words and similar concepts being thrown around here, but we're really entering into this section where we're trying to invoke a sense of deepening our own understanding through, of course, receiving the teachings and inspiration and blessings from Yamantaka, our own gurus, whatever. I mean, all of these forces that are there are just waiting to help us to develop these two states of mind that will help us to initially overcome self-cherishing, since that is kind of the main culprit that we're dealing with on a more kind of active level, because that's what's driving us to engage in so much negative karma in a much more overt way. And the other demon, the demon of self-grasping, that's kind of its companion. Again, sometimes following, sometimes leading, but essentially just these two with this interplay. Both mistaken conceptions, both can be annihilated through realizing the opposite mode of apprehension, seeing things in truth. Okay. Wow, it's a lot of words tonight. So let's do a little discussion. I'm going to go check on Mom. I think she's been doing much better. Instead of getting herself to bed and everything. So I'm going to put on the screen just very briefly the questions from tonight. You were sent them, I think, so you do have these as well. Is again, starting with that one verse 45. I'm sorry, not 45. What am I going to move this thing out of the way? 49, specifically explaining why self-cherishing is described there as an enemy, a thief, and an imposter. Remember those three things, right? And then comment on the first two lines of 50, then the last two lines of 50, and then we didn't get to 54. So you're going to have to hold on to that fourth question until next week. All right. Take it away, Bill. Do you have a question?
I'm going to be able to lead discussion next week.
Okay.
So just want to let folks know that I have a work commitment.
Okay. Well, if no one else is there to do that, I'll do that next week. Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent. Just want to let you know before it got away from me.
I appreciate that, Bill. Okay, I'll be right back. Carry on.
So our first question tonight is on verse 49, and I'll just read it so that we have it fresh in our minds. But is this being the case, we seize the enemy, we seize the thief who deceived us through lying in ambush, we seize the impostor who disguised himself as us. Ah, all the doubt about it being self-cherishing has been cut. So does anybody want to talk about, I guess, their impression of, describing self-cherishing in these three ways? or any thoughts that this verse brought up for you, or anything that you're thinking about in relation to this evening in general. It's a bit quiet out there. I can talk a little bit if nobody else wants to. Yeah, I don't know. I've been noticing that I do. Oh, Nanda, are you talking? You're muted. If you're talking, I can't hear you.
Does that fix it? Did that fix it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I always, at this stage of each one of the classes, I always feel so saturated with information and concepts and language and whatnot that I can't even form a thought. I'm just like so
You're just trying to absorb it at this point in time, and so
yeah, there's just so
that
much
makes
that
sense.
comes in, and then like over the course of the next couple days, I'll go like, oh God, why didn't I think of that? Or you know what I mean? It's like it'll come to me later. Like on Thursday, I'll have this flash of insight or something, It's like but it's
that's pretty normal.
the whole thing, the thing if anybody's got anything to say at all, when he was talking earlier with the mala, right? I've listened for a really long time to how that isn't-ness of the mala, how that works. It's like, there it is, you can see it, we know it's not really there, but there's this other essence of it, and I get lost in that. I just get lost. I don't know. Anyway, that's where I'm at this evening.
Well, I think this is a good text, because I think then you can focus on self-cherishing, right? Even if the self-grasping aspect is kind of difficult for you to grasp, no pun intended, then you
Right.
can kind of focus your energy more on that self-cherishing aspect, which I think one of the things I've been, just now that we're in this stage of it, you're really starting to get that kind of tantric flavor of how this is written, and this idea of kind of transforming energy. And so I just find it interesting. I don't know. I had like a work issue today. It's just interesting to me how, like, I'm starting to put it into practice with the small little things, like the small irritations. But, if you get a big enough irritation, it's still just kind of like blinds me, and then I like come back around and I can just kind of lay the whole situation out in my head after the fact, but I'm like, man, did it again.
Yeah.
Did the same thing again.
It's like I have
Anyway.
I think I understand what you're saying. I have pretty good success. Like today, there was this thing between myself, a neighbor, and our dogs, right? There was this event, and it required, we had to talk it through, we had to do some work. Right? And it was quite successful. It worked out. And you know, we're going to continue to be pleasant neighbors and all that. And so when I'm working on that level, the whole process makes sense to me, and I can incorporate it. I can attempt to incorporate it. I'm not saying that I'm 100%, obviously I'm not, but then when I try to expand this whole concept to the larger picture, because we're just in this, me personally, I consider that we're in a state of existential crisis as a culture. You know, I think we're really in trouble, and how to apply these concepts to the larger picture and what's to be done, and how to stay sane, how to be in that, in a kind of a bodhisattva way of being, like to continue to attempt to be that, when it's just like no, you know, I know you guys are nuts. I can't, it's unacceptable what's happening. It's unacceptable. I can't put my compassionate brain around it. It's just terrible.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think for one, a couple different things. One, I guess that's why it's a thief, you know, because it's pretty dang sneaky. And, you know, there's times when like it's easy to see the thief, I guess, and you spot the thief. And then there's other times when, you know, you're just not that good at spotting it. As far as like the bigger picture, I mean, for me, I think that just like reinforces renunciation. Like, you know, anytime I've talked to Venerable Chudran about this kind of thing, she always says, like, use it for your renunciation. You know, like there's been a few times where I've relied on her in just awful situations, you know, just terrible tragedies. And I was just like, you know, how can this happen? You know, and she's just been like, it's samsara. Like, and you know, above all, just use it. Like, use it to fuel your desire to get out, because if you get out, then you can actually help, you know. And what you're feeling right now is a sense of helplessness because you can't help, like you don't know how to help, you know. And that's just kind of how she's kind of put that to me. And I mean, obviously that's, you know, like everything else, very easy to say. But yeah, I definitely feel you. It's hard. I'm trying to think if how much of that we covered. An imposter. Your self-cherishing is this imposter who's disguised themselves. Anyway, I dig that. I just dig that sneaky thief kind of idea, because it's like stealing your joy. You know, your self-cherishing just kind of sneaks in and like steals your joy and your merit, you know. I love the crazy imagery of this, because I just think that's just, I don't know, as somebody who struggles with anger, it just makes sense to me, because I'm just like, I just want to turn that energy and just, instead of directing it outward at, you know, poor people who have no control over what they're doing whatsoever, you know, direct it at something good, you know. So yeah. So the next verse that we're supposed to comment on, the first two are, spin the sharp weapons of actions overhead, furiously spin them 3 times overhead. Spread your legs, the two truths, open wide your eyes, method and wisdom, bearing the fangs of the 4 powers, pierce the enemy. I just think this verse is awesome.
Yeah.
It's just awesome. I feel like it's like the Tibetan Buddhism art of war.
Well, I
just
have
think it's awesome.
and if you look at an image of the guy, of the dude, Yamantaka, right? It's like, I want to be that. I want to just like,
Yeah.
blam! You know? He's like, he's fierce. He's like,
He's yeah. Yeah, I think it's just really incredible. I don't know. It just makes me want to like take that energy, and use it better. Because man, I have a really hard time getting rid of it. So I need to learn to direct it better.
yeah.
I just need to it's here for a reason, and I need to take it and use it for good.
Yeah.
So looks like Don's back, so he might want to stop us from getting too confused.
Yeah.
But we were talking about just how like one of the things we were talking about, I don't know if you caught it, was just how it's easy to get hung up on emptiness, and just kind of get stuck on that idea. Because for a lot of us, we don't really have the best grasp of what it, of emptiness at this point.
Say a little more about what you mean by getting hung up on emptiness. I'm trying to.
Nunda was just explaining, like that she just like her mind, like when she hears, like the talk about like whatever object we're talking about, like it just kind of like, the two truths just kind of spins your mind a little bit, and it's easy, like if you don't, it's easy to get hung up on it, I guess. And so how do you continue to focus on the other aspects of the path while still like being like, I still don't get this? I guess was kind of her question.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to practice them both together, obviously. I mean, that's why you don't really have complete command of that until you become a Buddha. But yeah, I mean, let me think about that. Maybe I'll add something later. But because again, is the sutra presentation again is generally where you kind of recognize that there's certain things that are more method oriented, and you practice those, and then you kind of go over to the other side of the wisdom side and really get kind of strong with that. You do have them complementing each other, but you're never really trying to unite them. In Tantra, the main practice in Tantra is what's called deity yoga. But deity yoga is practiced within emptiness yoga. And that's where, like, I heard the bit where you were saying, Bill, that you want to be Yamantaka. You said that too, Nanda. I think, you want to be that kind of energy in the world. Well, that's what deity yoga is all about. And Yamantaka in particular is very much about using the energy of anger, of this kind of mind that is really not wanting things to be the way that they are, but you're again focusing it inward and focusing it on the things that are obstacles to achieving your potential. So the idea is that when we are practicing in Tantra deity yoga, you do it from within the sphere of emptiness, understanding that things don't have any inherent existence, which you have to have some familiarity, obviously, with the meditations on that, the analyses, and kind of come to that conclusion. And then you arise within that, because the play of everything, if you will, the way everything is kind of unfolding in the world around us is all done within emptiness. And it's only possible within emptiness that things can manifest. And so you see these two things as, again, being completely complementary, that the realm of appearance and all the various things happening and what's going on in our lives and in the world around us and everything within the sphere of its ultimate nature, its reality. appearance and reality, and these two kind of being there together. You know, and it's hard to kind of get there, but I think that's the goal, is to, and certainly in Tantra, it's the way that you practice, or supposed to practice all the time, is that you see things from within an understanding of their emptiness, and yet their conventional nature still existing, still appearing. Not with inherent existence, not with independent existence, but with a dependent existence. If we see emptiness as a lack of independent existence and conventional reality as a dependent existence, then it makes complete sense. Everything is dependent within a lack of being independent, right? And that's how everything always is, and it always was. And it's just that we don't realize it. We're blind to it. Yeah. So I don't know. Those are my initial thoughts on that, but yeah, I mean, that's great. You have the motivation to be this, to, like, transcend all of this nonsense and to break through the garbage that is binding us. And that's an important part of it. That's what I think we're getting in this section in particular, is like, you should be getting to that point, like that verse 49 that we looked at. Like, you should see it by now, right? You should see that this is what's really going on. And you just discussed that, I think, with the first question. And then you just want to make that reality. So you want to get these two truths actualized in your own mind, really understand how things exist, ultimately their emptiness, and that will inform your perception of their conventional reality, because you see they cannot have any independent concrete existence. So therefore, they're merely imputed, merely designated. That's the only way. They can only have nominal existence. They can't have anything kind of objectively from their own side. Sorry, I'm teaching again. Any comments on any of that, or you want to continue looking at this verse 50, I think is what you were working on, right? With Yamantaka.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if we really got anywhere.
No, it's okay. Got somewhere.
I thought it was pretty. It's just really interesting to me because, like, I had an experience today. I was thinking about it during the meditation. I decided to try and bring it into class, and immediately I'm like thinking of, Atisha, and it's just like, this idea, as soon as you've realized you have a negativity, you should purify it, like, right away, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I'm kind of working through this whole problem, this whole story in my head, and trying to incorporate it into class. And then we get to this last line for class, essentially for the day, which is, the fangs represent the four opponent powers. And I'm like, I was already there, I was like, already realized, I was like, okay, you stepped in it again, as Dom likes to say.
Yeah. Got it all
Purify,
over.
you know.
Yeah.
But I was saying how, like, I feel like I'm getting better with the annoyances, like if I stub my toe, or like Rinpoche was saying, like, I've really been working a lot with driving, people, but it's just really tough. I mean, the sneakiness of it when it's a big thing, it's hard for me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not, I gotta, wish I could catch myself
Right.
sooner.
Well, and again, that's a good impulse as well. Just like what I was saying earlier about having the desire, the aspiration to be like that, at least to have that impulse of wanting to improve, wanting to do better, wanting to catch it sooner, wanting to, not have it arise at all. These are how we actually change. If you weren't holding those thoughts and you'd just be sitting back and saying, oh, just take over, self-cherishing, take over, self-grasping, take over, just do whatever you normally do. I'll be lounging here, not doing any work to curtail you. And instead,
For
go ahead.
For our meditation last night, we did the disadvantages of self-cherishing, and Venerable Chudrin's Lam version of it. And like, I meditated on this last night, that, like, in some ways, like, the sneakiness of it sets you up to fail, and then you end up like feeling bad about the fact that you failed, which is your guilt, which is just more self-cherishing. So it's just kind of like this, like,
Spiral.
yeah, like this cycle, where you're just reinforcing it. It's like, it's you like go past regret to guilt, then you've already like, fed yourself cherishing more by doing that.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah,
So I
yeah.
was thinking about in relation to that last line of the four opponent powers, and just
Mm-hmm.
making sure that I'm like, okay, like regret that action.
Right. Well, like I said earlier
Don't
tonight, if you introduce the wisdom aspect.
Yeah, like don't feed the self-grasping.
Mm-hmm.
So
And the self-cherishing. Yeah. Because all those negative
anyway,
states of mind, the guilt and everything are all of the same ilk. So, good, good. Okay. Anything else tonight? Don't know. Anyone didn't get a chance to say anything who wants to add anything or question anything? Hmm. So what I would encourage you to do is certainly, continue working with these teachings, but to the degree that you can practice that idea that's in verse 49 of like really seeing that this is the enemy arising, this is the thief, this is the imposter, this is, that's a really powerful verse for me. I really like that one a lot because it's like it's it's the mindfulness that we need to have throughout our day, because I already have been encouraging you to kind of be aware of when self-cherishing is arising or self-grasping. Self-grasping is again a bit more subtle, but when we see that we're following that mind, especially in the more overt ways, that's where you generally have to start. You can't start in the subtler ways that these things are appearing. You have to start with what's the real in your face kind of way that while you're driving or while you're doing whatever, that you see the mind of self-cherishing take off and defend yourself in a sense, but it's not yourself, it's an imposter. And it's the enemy, it's what's going to drive us into deeper and deeper trouble. It's the thief that's stealing all of our merit, all of our happiness, all in that moment. We have a choice. So anyway, your dog is stretching, Ruth. Anyway, good. All right, anyone else? Then let's go ahead and do our
She's absorbing the teachings too.
yeah, she's getting some imprints. I
Yeah,
hope.
I hope so too. Thanks.
All right, let's go ahead and do our dedication prayers there. Those on the screen. Whoops, click on that. There we go. Okay. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And sometimes Rinpoche, when he would do retreats and things, he would replace this with the wisdom of emptiness. May the wisdom of emptiness that has not arisen arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. We can do this prayer actually with anything that you're wanting to meditate on. May the wisdom of Lojong, mind thought transformation that has not arisen arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. It's a powerful prayer to bring to anything that we're focusing on in particular. And let's do the prayers for our special teachers, those beings who are playing that role of guiding us in the same way that we were asking Yamantaka to intervene, to help us, to bless us, to inspire us. We need these beings in this world to give us the Dharma, to help us to practice it through their example, as well as through their teachings and all the other things they do for others. So as we recite the first verse there for His Holiness, think that we're making strong prayers for all those gurus who are still abiding with us, all our precious teachers, to have good health, long lives, and to have all their holy wishes fulfilled. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And of course, recognizing that we want to create the causes and conditions for Rinpoche to swiftly return, to be in a human form once again, this enlightened mind that we can benefit from through receiving teachings, initiations, and so on from that holy being. We make strong prayers for his swift return. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings, through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. So let's turn our attention towards those beings whose suffering moves us at this time. Again, we've been throughout this text practicing Tonglen, having this strong view of wanting to remove their suffering and wanting to give them whatever we have so they can become happy and have true peace. We want to bring the same sort of spirit to this part of our dedication. So wherever beings are experiencing sufferings that move us, particularly in the wars that are going on in the world right now, we live in a time where all these things are broadcast to us, where we have images and people reporting and giving us a much different view of things than perhaps we've ever had, and the kind of unbelievable suffering that is happening for so many beings as war goes on in our world, as well as climate disasters, all other sorts of things, mass shootings. Any place where suffering has moved you, let your mind go there right now, and especially with beings that you know who are experiencing obstacles, who are experiencing illness, who are dying, who have died. And make your heart connected to them and kind of have that perfect pathway then for everything that you have to go right from your heart to those beings. Think that it immediately becomes the cause to remove all of their suffering and to bring them true happiness and peace. And again, just give this away entirely, all of our merit, all of our happiness, all of our resources, everything, so beings can have those results. And may all beings be free from suffering and find true happiness through what we've done here tonight. Okay, thank you all so much, and I'll see you. I'll be from Santa Fe next time. So yeah, there I won't have any of these other paying attention to my mother and what have you. So I'm happy to do the discussion next Tuesday.
And I might come in late, see if I can escape.
Okay.
This is actually part of the drama of my day, is what I have to do next. So,
I see.
may if possible, but from 6:30 to 7, at least I'm going to be busy.
Okay. All right. No worries. All right, everyone. Have a good week. Try to practice well as best as you can, but don't beat yourself up if you aren't able to practice as good as you want to. Just use that as an impetus to keep doing the work. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Be
Thanks, Don. This is a great teaching. Appreciate it.
I love being with all of you. I wish I could be there in person to all these teachings with you in person, but anyway, someday. Okay. All right.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you all. Thanks, Colleen, Bill.